Good evening, welcome. It's nice to see a full house again at the Wheeler Institute event. This is a very, very special evening. Let me briefly introduce myself. I'm Sergei Guriev, Dean of London Business School and Professor of Economics. I'm really happy to welcome you here because today's Journeys event by Wheeler Institute for Business and Development is about people who actually embody journeys and travel. They will talk about travel, and Rajesh, who will be the moderator, will talk about their travels as well, but they will also talk about their personal and professional journey. So Tony and Maureen Wheeler are the founders of Wheeler Institute for Business and Development and the London Business School. Tony is an alum of MS5. 1972, so one of the first cohorts of LBS graduates. You now see all generations of LBS alums in the room, including Tony's classmates. Quite a few people here who came to celebrate Tony's journey tonight. This journey, of course, is related to the adventure with the Lonely Planet. Some of you probably have benefited from Tony and Maureen's project and now business empire, which as we just discussed, revolutionized travel, and especially in some parts of the world which were less visited before those times. And so this is what Rajesh, Tony, and Maureen will talk about today. I will not take too much time from that, but the idea is that initially Rajesh will lead a conversation with Tony and Maureen for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So let me welcome Rajesh on stage. Rajesh is a co-director of Wheeler Institute together with Ilyas Papayanov, who've led this institute that has had a lot of impact on lives of people in developing countries through entrepreneurship and business. This is an amazing venture for the last 7 years now. This is one institute which is probably the biggest institute in the history of the school and counting. So involving a lot of people in those developing countries, in the school, faculty and students working on projects through which business transforms lives in developing and emerging economies. Rajesh is not just a professor of marketing. Rajesh is a Tony and Maureen Wheeler Chair in Entrepreneurship. And this is, again, another way through which Tony and Maureen have helped the school to invest in our faculty and bring people like Rajesh to London, to Regent's Park. Rajesh, the floor is yours. This is your event now. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergei. Thank you, Sergei. Can you all hear me? Maureen, you're in the middle. Yes, thank you. What an absolute delight, gosh, and to welcome you back and to welcome so many of you. Some of you, were here more than 50 years ago, and you're back, and it's so very special, and we're so very grateful. Sergei mentioned that Tony's a graduate of London Business School. The other part of that story is that Maureen is an honorary fellow of the London Business School. And this is a title that the London Business School hands out very, very sparingly. When the school bestows this title, there's also a speech to go with. So a member of our community speaks about the person being honored. As it happened, when Maureen received the fellowship, I was the person asked to speak about Maureen. So I had a whole speech prepared, Exactly. I had exactly. I spent a lot of time on this speech, and Maureen meets me like 10 minutes before, as we've all got our hoods and our robes and everything, and Maureen says, "So Rajesh, I hope you're not going to say anything flattering about this, about me. I hope you're not going to embarrass me." It's like, so I look at my notes. I don't know, it depends on one's definition of flattering. But I think I'll have to wing it. Yet again, I had to wing the speech that I introduced Maureen with. So, Maureen, thank you very much for coming and always being so gracious, and Tony for being here. So now, rather than give a speech, which failed last time, I'm going to do a slideshow, because these folks, being in the travel industry, are used to doing a whole bunch of slideshows. So I was up till late the last few days, Googling and taking pictures from various sources of Tony and Maureen and the Lonely Planet story. So what I'm going to do is show a bunch of pictures and ask Maureen and Tony questions about these pictures. But first, I'll introduce by saying, yes, the word empire, these two wonderfully understated individuals are hardly the emperors that one associates with an empire, but the word empire is used a lot. 150 million plus books sold since that first book in 1973. And books on virtually every country in the world. Now, I was looking up what's been said, and untold numbers of books have been and articles have been written on it. One of my favorites was this one from 1986 by Nicholas Kristof of the New York Times. And he says, one indication of the Wheelers' impact is the Tony Wheeler slept here sign on a small hotel in Jodhpur, India. Next to the sign is a page from the hotel register that Mr. Wheeler signed when he stayed at the hotel years ago. Travelers gaze at it wistfully. The hotel has been touched by the gods. Emperors, gods. I said I wouldn't embarrass you. Yeah.
Making it now.
And the Lonely Planet guidebooks are quite simply like no others. So now, over to you. And Maureen, question for you. I'm going to show this picture.
There should be a law against you getting photographs out there.
Oh, if only you knew. So, Maureen, what is happening on that right-hand side there? And can you explain the context here?
So the artist
Yes.
is, what's his surname?
Carl Randall.
Carl Randall, and he paints portraits. And we bought some of his, we met a whole lot of things, but basically there he had decided to do a portrait of us, and he asked us to nominate a spot. And we had met at Regent's Park, so that is like where we met, or so-called where we met. And he couldn't get my nose right, so he came round to the house to repaint it a few times. Not the house, my nose.
As you can see, it's very accurate because the post office tower does appear right behind
LBS. And you were reading car classics. But
I was, when I met Maureen, I was sitting on the bench first of all, wasn't I?
Yeah.
Reading a car magazine, and this beautiful young woman came up and sat down on the other end of the park bench and started reading
Tolstoy.
Tolstoy, as you do.
And
obviously a gap there, but you know.
But then, Tony, I was reading there the Lonely Planet story book, and you had an amazing pickup.
I don't think it was a very...
the pickup line was, so... is this what one does on a Wednesday afternoon?
I think I said, is this the in place to read on?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you have a good memory. Yes, that's something. And but then you continued on. So you met right across from LBS. I mean, we're at the Marylebone Town Hall where, couples get married on a daily basis.
We could have got married here. I don't know why we didn't.
Oh, well, I have pictures of that too. But first, 1972, and this picture apparently was taken at 2 a.m.
Yeah, right in front of the garden, in front of the school.
It was a summer ball.
Summer ball, yeah.
And the very next day...
We left.
We left and we went down, picked up the minivan that we'd, and left to drive to Afghanistan.
As one does.
Well, this was 1 year before, October the 7th, 1971, Hampstead.
Yes, we could have done it here, but we did it at Hampstead Registry Office. And that was actually 1 year to the day from when we met on that park bench.
Basically, because Tony said, you know, we met on the 7th of October. I said, no, I don't remember that. And he said, well, if we get married on the 7th of October, then I'll never forget our anniversary of anything. So.
I have lots of 7th of October pictures coming up. But Tony, I have to say, that shirt.
Look, we were all dressed like that at the business school at that
the
time.
scarf, I mean, that's amazing. It's such a gorgeous picture of the two of you.
After that, I went back to work, and Tony went back to business school, just straight. And I walked in, and my boss said, and I had all this planned, I said, Simon, I'm sorry I'm late, but I got married this morning. And he said, that's okay, Maureen, don't do it again.
And you stayed true to the instructions, yeah? This is the famous car.
Yeah, that's actually in front of my parents' place. And it was like a day or so after the picture. I always think that picture looks like I'm 16 and she's 12. But actually, we just graduated. And we went and picked the car up and drove off. And that's the sort of the picture of us about to leave England.
And you paid how much for this car?
£65. That's all I could afford.
Well, it wasn't the most reliable always.
It was a British car, they overheat.
So now, Maureen, the next picture. By the way, what I'm doing here, it's the Lonely Planet journey. So we'll first talk about the journey that led to the first book, which was this overland trip, which is where these pictures are from. And then we'll talk more about the growth and scaling the entrepreneurial idea. And then we'll talk about the life as an entrepreneur and all of the challenges and opportunities.
You've only got 45 minutes.
I have lots of pictures, yes. Did I mention? Oh, next picture, Maureen, is one of a few that involves hair. So this is, you, go on, you could...
That's in Iran.
In Iran.
Isfahan, in Iran. And you can see, I mean, I was covered, arms and legs, but I didn't have to wear a shawl or anything. They were really quite relaxed.
Yeah.
And we went and Tony took that photograph on this huge bridge.
And what was it like, 1972 Iran?
Iran was fascinating. It's a very beautiful country.
Still fascinating today.
Yeah. It was interesting. People were friendly. We didn't have any problems. We didn't spend a lot of time. We had to go across because running out of money. But I really enjoyed Iran. Tony's been back since and has the same, it hasn't changed that much, apart from everything that's changed.
Yeah, of course, yeah. This actually was a little before, right?
Yeah.
Switzerland.
Yeah.
You can tell by the snow.
Yeah. But wait, this, though, by the time you got to Afghanistan, in true business school fashion, you made a trade, you sold your car.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan.
£4 or £5 profit.
And it took us 3 days bargaining in Kabul at the hotel to get that extra £5. But we had to throw in the tent, the camping gas, and 2 mattresses, those little air mattresses that by that time were totally flat. So, £5. And we kept going. And Tony said, Maureen, why don't we just let it go? And I'm going, no, we need to make a profit.
And that's so wonderfully romantic. Also, I understand, on the 7th of October?
Another year had passed. 7th of October, 72 at the Taj Mahal.
So you made it through Pakistan to India. And in India, there's this incredibly spiritual place, Varanasi. But Maureen, you don't look very happy here.
Yes, they burn bodies on the ghats there. And that's fine, but they throw all kinds of stuff into the water. So at 6 a.m. in the morning, I'm going on a little boat on a tour down the Ganges, and there's bits of skulls floating past. It wasn't really nice. Yeah. And I look like that. This is not nice.
So you were in India, and then you moved up to Nepal. So this was the hippie trail. Maybe this is a good time to sort of tell us about the
we never
hippie
called
trail.
it the hippie trail. It was always referred to as the Asia Overland Trip or the route to the east. But the hippie trail definition came along later. But I'll embrace that. I'm quite happy to say I was on the hippie trail.
Well, I mean, you did go to interesting places.
Yes, but we weren't buying that. What we did, we were changing money illegally. In that.
Oh, in that case.
Yeah.
This was just a front.
It was just a front for illegal money changing.
Sure, Maureen, yes.
No, seriously.
And then, wait, so you ran out of money.
No, we still had some money left.
Okay.
But the only flight of the whole trip was from Calcutta to Bangkok. And then in Bangkok, we started hitchhiking. So Maureen's beside the road in the south of Thailand, and we're trying to hitch a ride, Singapore bound.
To Singapore. And you arrive in Singapore, and you see signs like this. Males with long hair will be attended to last.
And this was because
And let me show a picture of you.
Did I get my hair cut? Lee Kuan Yew was convinced that these hippies were going to undermine the hard-working youth of Singapore, and long hair was what would lead them astray. So you encountered these signs all over Singapore, banks and post offices and government offices and so on.
So the intent, I love these pictures so much that I forgot to ask about, what was the idea? So you had just graduated, Tony, as you mentioned, and you had a job lined up with Ford.
Yeah, I did. I had a sort of a business school job, and I said, look, I really don't want to start it immediately. And they said, we'll hold it for you for a year. Weren't they nice in those days? I've got the letter somewhere still saying this. So the intention was I would come back 1 year later. And we were going to travel a bit in that year.
A bit meaning where? What was the intent?
Well, the intent was we'd get out to Australia, because at that point you didn't need a visa. You could just turn up and, I'm English, let me in. And they would let you in and you could work. And we'd work there for a few months and we'd get enough money to fly back to London. So it was a 1 year trip around the world.
And Maureen, there's this poignant passage in your book about your mum coming to see you off at the airport in Belfast, where you grew up, and you were intending to come back to Belfast when you left Belfast to come to London.
I would be in London like all Irish girls, come and spend a year here and go back, and that would be it. But
and your mum said,
"You'll not come back." And I said, "Of course I will." I came back for Christmas, but she was right. I never came back after that to live. I did go visit her occasionally.
Mm. So the two of you have 1 year. Ford says we'll have a job for you. So you say, let's go as far as we can go to Australia. The intent was to stop in Australia?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then turn around and come back.
Well, work, because we could work there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And by that time, we would have run out of money. So we needed...
Speaking of which, yes. So you're in Indonesia. You cross Singapore, you're in Indonesia.
Right. And then we hitched a ride. We hitched down to Singapore, and then we hitched another ride on this New Zealand yacht.
And what is this yacht made out of?
Concrete. Yeah, it was a concrete boat. No, the New Zealanders are very strange. So this group of lads had built the boat in their backyard, and it had taken them a couple of years. And then they spent 2 years traveling around the Pacific. And then they got to Indonesia, and they had to take the boat across to Australia to lay it up and get repairs done before the cyclone season. And so they needed some crew to help them. So it didn't have anything fancy. There was an engine, which didn't work, and a water tank. And when that ran out, we ran out. It's supposed to take 6 to 8 days, but it took 16 days.
And wait, you said the water tank ran out.
They didn't have they didn't have refrigeration, just an ice box. So all the food ran out after 6 days.
Well, refrigerated food.
Yeah, so we ended up with there was the water also. The water tank had split or something. I can't remember, but that was done. And the Indonesians had been supposed to fill it up with diesel, but they'd taken the money and only filled it up halfway. So we got so far, and then we just got stuck in the ocean, just sitting there, basically, for a couple of days. We were
Waiting for the wind to blow.
Waiting for the winds to blow. So every day at lunch at 12, they got this sextant out and figured out where we should go. So, we've gone too far this way. Let's zigzag back this way, whichever way the wind's blowing. So we did that.
We do have I'm looking over at the good sailor here, who would correct all this.
No. So we ended up, we had to ration the water, and we couldn't wash. So when we finally arrived, we were all caked in salt. And the food, these boys had put all this tinned food in the bilge for an emergency, and this was an emergency, and it was always one of three things: cream corn, asparagus spears, or Christmas pudding.
And we never caught a single fish that whole 6 months. We had a line out the back and nothing bit.
Yeah.
And then you somehow ended up in an oil rig?
Where?
On
an oil rig. It was the tender that comes out to... So we were out of petrol, we were out of food, we were out of water. And we were on this little yacht, and we bobbed up to this enormous tender. And the captain said, "Where did you come from?" And he said, "Well, you can come on board, but you can't tell anybody because... you should be in quarantine. You can't just go, land here." So we got off. There was this big stretch of deck, and there were 7 of us, and we were all running up and down, just spreading stretching our legs. And then they said, "Well, you better stay for dinner." And they had a walk-in freezer just for ice cream. Most amazing thing I've ever seen. So we had a night. So the captain said, "Oh, we'll have a party since you're here," which was an excuse for everyone to drink. And then the next morning, they gave us some diesel. They couldn't fix the engine, so they just said, "Well, set off, and you'll get to Australia in a couple of days, and don't tell anyone you stopped off here, because we're not supposed to have people stopping off on oil tenders."
Oh.
So yeah.
But you made it.
Yeah.
That's in Australia.
That's on Northwest Cape.
Yeah.
And we went there because the captain of our boat, we had to go somewhere where there was customs and immigration. And just a bit north of there is the American satellite
Navy
tracking.
station, yeah.
Naval
Still, to this day, we were there.
I think it's
Oh, that's
still
right.
there.
Yeah.
Exmouth.
Yeah, Exmouth, yeah.
So they did have customs for the Americans coming in. So he said we were the first boat that wasn't an American boat in the whole 5 years he'd been there. So he was really impressed with us, and he went through every single one of our bags, all of our rucksacks. And then there was a pub, and we went into the pub. We couldn't afford anything for this stage. And we said, "Where's the nearest town?" And they said, "Well, that would be Carnarvon. It's about 200 miles away." And then I said, "Well, where's the road?" And he said, "Well, there isn't a road. There's a track, and it goes for 80 miles. You can follow that. But it's 2 p.m. And so Tony said, "Oh, we'll go. We'll just go." We've got sleeping bags. And I said, "But Tony, if we sleep by the track, there's spiders here, there's snakes, or I don't even know if kangaroos eat people. I don't know what." And he said, "It'll be fine." So we did.
And it was.
So, that in itself, the truck story I wrote, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip and get you to Sydney.
Which again is the 7th of October. And the Opera House behind us is still under construction.
Yeah.
They hadn't opened it. They opened it in December that year.
As was your first book.
Still a chip. Came out just about that time.
I'm going to pause just to get some context here. So you arrived in Australia.
Right.
You famously 37 cents or something?
And that was we got to Sydney before we
Okay.
were down to the last 27.
27 cents, yes. And you needed a job, which was the intent anyway. You said you'd get a job. You each got jobs.
Yep.
And how did that lead to a guidebook?
We'd had
empire?
so much fun. That
Yeah.
The idea, goodbye Ford Motor Company, we weren't going to get back in a year. We decided what we would do instead is we would spend a year in Australia and we would save enough money to travel another year. So the 1-year trip around the world had now become a 3-year trip around the world. And during that year in Sydney, there we were in Sydney, we produced the first book because so many people asked us, where
So
did you go?
how did this happen? So you show up in Sydney and just random people you're talking to.
No, we both had jobs. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
No,
And-
but yeah, we got jobs, but we met people.
Yeah.
Like we'd go to things, and there'd be people there, and we started talking.
And what were the kinds of questions?
How did you do it? How do you get across India? Did you get sick? How much money do you need? Where do you get a bus?
And
All the things that there was no information about.
yeah. And now, so you did what?
Well, we both had jobs, and then Tony said we should write a book about this. And so you had the experience of doing the newspaper layouts and things.
The best education I had is not at London Business School, but as an undergraduate, was working on the university newspaper. So I knew a little bit about publishing and how things got put together. So when we decided to do a book for answering all these questions, I knew how to put it together. And we decided to do it ourselves, not to find a publisher.
But, this is where all the grand planning, your undergraduate degree was in engineering.
Wonderful subject. Wonderful subject. All the engineers here, I'm sure there are some. The engineers make good guidebook writers, They
Yeah, clearly.
they know that all the square pegs have to go in square holes. And they know that every nut and bolt has to be there.
Well, the other thing is Tony always kept copious notes about everything. So he had, that's how he knew we had met on the 7th of October, because he met a girl on the 7th of October, So all of that happened. So Tony had all these notes, and he had the know-how, because nobody needs to know this, but to put books together, you used to typeset galleys, glue them down. It's a very tedious process, which no longer exists. But he knew how to do that. So he said, look, let's do a book. And we were saving money, weren't going out much at night. So I asked my boss, could I bring my typewriter home? And so we typeset it between us.
Wow.
You showed me how to lay things up.
And away it went.
Yeah, and then
Away
we got
it
the
went.
book.
And that was the book.
It was
that
more
was
like a brochure.
Yeah.
96 pages.
And you did it where? The advanced production techniques you used that you learned?
No, we just, I borrowed my typewriter, I borrowed the guillotine so we could cut all the pages, and I borrowed the stapler so we could staple all the pages together. So, that was technology.
Yeah, handcrafted.
And then when we got the books, we took them to a printer, and they came back just all the sheets. So we had to trim them and put all the numbers on the pages and staple the books together. Tony drew all the pictures on the cover. And then we just took them around the shops and sold them. And it was when we went to one of the shops, I went to one of the shops. We both had jobs, so we took a day off. And we went, and the shop, the lady in the shop said, you're not the usual publisher. Are you with Penguin or anyone? I said, no. She said, who are you with? And I said, Lonely Planet. Never heard of them. I'll take two. But then she went and told her friend, who was a reporter, that she'd got this strange girl come in selling these weird little books about travel, but she'd sold them already. She'd already sold the two as soon as they came in. And so the reporter said, oh, that's a story. So she did the story. That's from the newspaper story. And then we got on television and did a 6 o'clock in the morning, one of those one nobody ever watches. But it was, how we did all of this.
Why do you think there was so much demand?
Because there were so many people traveling.
Yeah, we were baby boomers essentially, and there were people of that age in early 20s, and they were going further than their parents had been. And the Hippie Trail was there, and the Beatles were in India, and the Marrakesh Express was going places, and the jumbo jets were just starting, and there were all sorts of good reasons, and there was just no information available. There we were.
In our MBA classes, we teach some folks here have been in classes I've taught where we use this concept of the winds of change and harnessing the winds of change.
Yeah.
They were blowing in your direction.
The interesting thing is that, so we weren't the only ones to get this idea in 73. There were probably about 6 other people, all of whom we met and know and became friends with.
Yeah, in France, Philippe Cloaguen, Guy de Routard. A little bit later, Rough Guides.
8 years later. But
Bill Dalton of Moon Publications.
yeah, there was a whole pack of people who realized. But what was interesting? Because it's sort of the same thing happened again with IBM and Microsoft. The big publishers didn't see this opportunity at all. They were doing cookery books or self-help books, but the whole travel thing, there was photos or fromers, which were mainly Europe and written for Americans. They just didn't see this whole, genre beginning to happen of travel. And it really wasn't until the mid-'80s where they did see it. And when they did see it, then they were thinking, oh, we better buy all these small companies, you know. So it really was one of those things that it was a movement or a business or an opportunity. Timing was perfect, but the people who were doing it were the people who were actually who were doing it. You know, they were like Bill Gates in his garage doing it, and nobody saw them coming until they were there. It was that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was a generational thing.
Yeah.
It was people who had experienced it themselves, and they could therefore not only see the problem, but also the solutions. And it was many more like them could do it now. We all remember those pictures. I should have put one of those of people in suits eating big steaks on a plane. That wasn't the plane journey. Now you mentioned the competitors, and you mentioned when people asked, you said you were from Lonely Planet. Of course, this is an iconic brand, and now won all kinds of branding awards. I don't know how many of you here know the story of how this great, wonderful brand, much-loved brand came to be. So, if you were a IBM or one of the larger publishers, you'd probably pay some marketing whiz to come up with a strategic branding exercise.
And to design the logo.
Yeah.
I designed that logo. It's just the way I designed it.
So I have a little video of that becomes relevant to the branding story here.
This is a song. What was a space captain? It's called. Once while traveling across the sky, this lovely planet called mine. Being curious of who close by, and now I'm caught here till I.
Those who didn't catch that, that's the
It was a mistake. I'm sorry. I just heard it wrong. I thought he sang Lonely Planet. Actually, he sang Lovely Planet. And it's too late to fix it now.
Speaking of fixing things and putting things together,
That's cut and pasting. That's what we had to do.
that was literally cutting and pasting.
Yeah, pages. Like India was 1,000 pages long. It was done like that. Cutting, sticking, cutting.
And you were on that table. This is a second book.
Yes.
That was in Singapore.
Yeah.
The second book was Southeast Asia on a Shoestring. So we then traveled for another year and ended up in this hotel in Singapore, which was about £1.50 a night, I think. And we stayed in that room for 3 months.
And the extensive production facilities.
That was the
The Singapore printer, we actually got a proper printer this time, because we'd saved up quite a bit in Australia, so we travelled for 15 months and put the book together. And the guy who we went to a company called Top Ann, who did all the big books, it was going to be properly bound, no more stapling, all of that. And he said, before we go any further, how are you going to pay for this? Because we were staying in this not very good area of Singapore. He said, I've never come to this hotel to meet publishing representatives before. It's interesting, So we had to get the bank to send money to say that we had enough money to pay for the first part of the printing.
But you sold a bunch in Singapore.
Yeah, we did. I always remember that we finished that first book and it went off to Top Ann to print. And then Top Ann were a printer for Lonely Planet for the next 50 plus years.
Wow.
They loved Lonely Planet, they really did. But we had a dummy of the book, and I went into MPH, which was the big bookshop in Singapore at the time, and I was pretty sure, they'd take at very least 10 copies to put on their bookshop shelf, and if I was lucky, they might take 50. And I'm sitting in front of him explaining why this book is going to sell because of all these hippies coming out. And he listened to me and he wrote down the name of the book, Southeast Asia on a Shoestring, and wrote something and turned it around and slid it across his desk to me. And the order quantity was 1,000. And I was saying 10 and maybe 50 if I'm lucky. And he'd ordered 1,000. And I thought, whoa, that was good.
And then you worked on the India book. Now, this was a big one.
Yeah, a few years passed and we did more books. But we really, they were smaller books because, we couldn't go away for too long. When we went away, the business stopped until we got back. And by this time, we were beginning to get a few other writers. But the idea of doing an India guide was a big project, and it was going to be much bigger than anything we'd done before. And effectively, it was. We had 2 other writers working with Maureen and I. We each spent about 3 or 4 months there, so it was altogether a year's research in India. We came back, put it together, and by this time we were doing books that were 200 or 300 pages, and this was closer to 1,000 pages. And instead of being back then, sort of £3.95, it was more like £9.95. And instead of selling, by this point, we were doing books that were selling 20 or 30,000 copies, and this sold 100,000. So suddenly, just boom, It was much bigger.
And that was a significant investment of time, capital.
Oh, yeah, because we had less than a dozen, I think we had 7 employees at the time.
Most of them
And
were.
if this had flopped,
That would have been the end.
Flopped, yeah. We'd have had to go back and get real jobs.
well, luckily it did not. Lonely Planet is the Bible in places like India, says Mark Ellingham, the founder of Rough Guides, 8 years later, when he's there, the cheeky British series, I don't know what that means. If they recommend the Rest House Bangalore, then half of the guest houses there rename themselves Rest House Bangalore.
or there'd be the new Rest House Bangalore, or the Rest House Bangalore Mark II. But that did happen quite a lot.
Yeah. But as you said, there were other books on India. And this in particular.
No, I think ours was the first.
Well,
the first comprehensive one,
True,
which is
true.
one of the reasons why it sold.
True,
Because there wasn't
true.
anything like it.
True, you're right. Sorry, I misspoke.
Well,
I meant the route, the India to Australia kind of thing. And this is a significant one.
This was called the Bit Guide. And it was never sold in bookshops. It didn't even have a nice cover like that. When we actually bought it for £1 when we travelled, and it was just mimeograph pages. And you had to go to an address in Notting Hill, when Notting Hill was not the salubrious place it is these days. And you knocked on the door, and someone came down, and you gave him £1.
As a voluntary donation or something like that,
Yeah,
right?
it
was, yeah,
It was
yeah.
a donation, they said.
And it was a lot of information and misinformation. You could tell
It was
that
just letters from people who were traveling, and sometimes there would be, it wasn't in order, it wasn't chronological.
What we might consider today user-generated content.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And then, so I want to dwell here a bit on 2 elements. And at this point, you had a team, and the gentleman on the right there was actually quite significant.
Jeff?
Jeff Crowther, the guy
Yeah.
with the balding head and the
Yeah.
beard. He was the man at Bit. And, I'd paid £1 and
Yeah.
taken his Bit guides. And by this point, Bit was a thing of the 60s. And the 60s were over.
And how did you persuade him to give a bit? And
To Jeff, I said, you've been doing this for nothing. Because he wasn't being paid. He was voluntary. Join us and we'll pay you.
so you converted a social enterprise to a commercial enterprise in true business school fashion.
Well, I'm afraid I did, yeah. Bit was falling over anyway. So
And he was happy to get paid.
he was happy to get paid, very happy. And he got, within a couple of years, he was getting paid extremely well.
When we eventually had to, he was paid royalties, and we, bought the royalties back. And that was in the late 80s, and we had to pay like over £1 million,
Yeah.
which is a lot of money.
Yeah.
Still is.
I'm being told that I need to speed
Yeah.
up. But I do want to note one more thing here. Maureen, Tashi is on your lap there.
Yep.
And what's it like to be married and be business partners at the same time?
Oh, it's hell.
It's true.
I think from my point of view, I really enjoyed. I loved. We started this in a way. It was our first child, and I loved it. But I loved the fact we never stopped talking about it. But at least it gave us something to talk about, and. It was something that, I don't know, it was important. And we very quickly, well, not very quickly, but when we started getting employees, we did work out how to separate, he had his role, I had my role, and how to navigate issues without having mad fights in front of the staff.
And your role was, and his role was?
Well, to begin with, it was probably, yeah.
If I would say anything, I'd say probably, business school, she was the business one. I was probably more the creative side. I sort of dreamed up the ideas.
I've always said that Tony was the architect and I was the carpenter, because all of the big things that we did, marketing and everything else, that was definitely you. But the kind of coming behind him and hammering it together, that was me.
So in the interest of time, I'm going to skip the bit about how you had an accountant who didn't file taxes for 2 years and so on. I'll skip all of that. And instead, Africa.
Well, that was the first book that Jeff brought to us. Because, the bit guide to Africa was even worse than the Asia one. But it was there. And we said, take that bit Africa guide and make it Africa on a shoestring. Actually, it was Africa on the cheap at first. But he did, and it was, and I think it still is, the only guide to all of Africa. Mm. So it was very successful.
Last weekend, the Africa Business Summit was sponsored in part by the Wheeler Institute, and I mentioned that bringing the 54 countries together, there's a lot of value in seeing them together while recognizing their distinctiveness. Maureen, this is a significant. Tell us more about this first, and it's significant for a few reasons.
Well, first of all, I'm dressed terribly.
Oh, come on!
That was Ladakh, and that was when we were doing the India book. We flew there, and not long before we went to India, I found I was pregnant. So, the first 5 months of my pregnancy were in India. And Ladakh is where we heard the name Taishi, which means a blessing. It's a Tibetan name. And so we called her Taishi when she was born 4 months later.
Oh. And you were back in... So Ladakh is Tibetan in India.
Yeah, it's
now an autonomous part of India. That's Nepal, I understand. So,
2 small children.
Yeah,
you even wrote a book on it.
Travel with Children, yeah.
I'm going to pause very quickly on this picture.
A few years later, and we decided that if we were going to take over the world as we intended, we had to have an operation in America. They're not the greatest travelers, but there are a lot of them. They're pretty good travelers. And they did buy lots of books. So Maureen and I, with our 2 small children, moved to America, moved to San Francisco, as you can see, and set up a Lonely Planet office there. I've got to say, it was all completely illegal because we couldn't get work permits to work there. So we just went in on tourist visas.
And we opened an office, hired people.
But you're not allowed to do that.
And innocent days. Seemed like in the book you mentioned that you're the immigration officer.
Yeah, well, we were there for 6 months, and we had legal advice, and our lawyer said, leave the country.
You can get a 6-month extension.
Yeah, so we thought, right, we'll go to, as one does, to South America for a month or 2, and we'll come back and get another 6 months. It didn't quite work that way.
We got in, and the immigration said, you guys, you're living here. You've got, and he was really nasty, and he said, you've got to leave. You've got, this was...
It's a good job we're not in Los Angeles today, right?
Exactly. Well, I always say, 2 things. First of all, we were boat people into Australia. Had it been, 30 years later, we would have ended up in Nauru. And coming out of America, we'd have probably been in a detention centre because they said, you can't come back, But we had this office and we had staff and we had a lot of books. And so we went away.
And a home.
Well, we already rented a place. That was okay.
We did have a car in the driveway, which Jeff was driving.
Yeah, so we ended up leaving America, coming back to Australia. We had planned to do that. We weren't going to be there forever. The idea was the office would work by itself. But... we had to leave. And then when Tony and I came back at Christmas, we left our children behind. with our grandparents, and the first question he said, "Where's your children?" He said, "Well, they're at home." "Okay, well then you're definitely leaving in 2 weeks' time." So we were able to come and go on these very, brief visits to keep everything moving.
I'm going to move forward to Lonely Planet grew. Yeah,
Did more books.
did many more books. Some. Growing pains occasionally. Well, read the book is what I would say. And then in 2007,
Yeah.
you decided.
It was time to go. It wasn't. We hadn't seen the TV series Succession yet, but it was not going to be a family dynasty. It wasn't. Our kids both worked at Lonely Planet for a spell, but neither of them were going to carry on the business. We were getting a little bit older. We could see the world changing digital, and although Lonely Planet was pretty pioneering on the internet.
Yeah.
Mention that, but it wasn't our first love. And with a business, whatever you do, it has to be a first love.
And the timing was excellent because I saw this number.
Timing is everything.
It was stunning to me. This is sales of guidebooks you sold in 2007.
Genius.
But look, it is still going fine, and they are still. I think the sales have picked up again in 2017. They've gone back again. They're not. They're never going to be what they once were.
Yeah.
But Lonely Planet is still going absolutely fine.
And the BBC didn't do a terribly good
No,
job.
I'm afraid not.
So you had this pioneering bulletin board, an early TripAdvisor, or at least contributions, user-generated.
Thorntree.
Yeah.
And apparently some people posted,
Huge amounts of stuff on it.
Yeah, but the BBC said, no, we need to control things.
Yeah, they were a bit touchy.
There was a lot of things.
And also you mentioned digital. I mean, you were among the pioneers.
Well, just on computers.
Yeah.
That computer back in 1978. When did we get that? 79?
No, that'd be in the 80s.
80s?
After Jim joined us.
Yeah, but
The
anyway,
typewriter came
Yeah.
before.
it was pre IBM and Microsoft. Pre Microsoft and DOS. It was at that point. Apple computers only typed in capital letters. Amazing. And that one we spent. I think it was nearly $20,000 for that computer back then.
And that beside it, those are the floppy disks that you used.
Not the 5. Floppy disks went down to 5 inches, down to 3 inches. They were 8-inch floppies.
But you were publishing
you were using
off
that,
of
yeah.
this, yeah.
We actually pioneered the whole desktop publishing thing. Publishers hadn't done this, where they were able to typeset, to go straight from there to the typesetter and then print out the galleys. We were still doing galleys, but that was one of the first things that we were able to.
We were ahead of the curve.
We were away, and we had our first website in 1994. So
Yeah, well, I'll come. And and this is GNN, and you were among the first advertisers on the internet. It's pretty amazing.
But O'Reilly's, they were real pioneers of the internet. They were. I forget what the software you used on it, but they sent off. We went off to drive across America and do a blog. The word blog hadn't been invented, and it was put up on there a year or so before our website.
But Tony would get into a motel and he'd have to get, the landline and plug the thing in or find a
make that
telephone
noise.
box to send and write
An
every
acoustic
day.
coupler.
Yeah.
We sent messages down the phone. God, it was so primitive.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you had the precursor to the smartphone, the Palm Pilot.
Palm Pilot. We produced a whole series. They were not successful at all, but it was interesting to do. City Sync, we called them.
So you were ahead of the technological curve in very many ways, and imagining what the future of publishing might look like. You'd also seen a few other geopolitical, sort of relating to today. Tony, you sent geopolitical challenges or other major crises. You sent me this picture.
In Australia during the pandemic. And I drove out to the Melbourne airport. Actually, because the car park was free. It was so
Because there was
amazing.
no planes were going.
You drove out not to fly.
Not to fly.
No
There were no
planes.
flights.
No, That I have to explain. That's the kind of thing he does. He went out, he came back, he said, I've just been there. I said, why? There are no flights. He said, I wanted to see what it was like when it was empty.
And you know, the airport security was still going. And there were two people sitting with the X-ray machine. And they said, you're the first person here this afternoon. And I went, there's the arrival and departure board. It's blank. There were no flights coming.
But it was not the first time you had seen a situation like that.
Yeah, that caused us. And we just printed 50,000 copies of the new China Guide, none of which you could sell at all.
Wow.
We did the same with the Soviet Union. When it crashed, we'd got this great book in Soviet Union that cost us a fortune. We had to change it to USSR virtually mid-print.
Wow.
No, I changed it from USSR.
To Russia.
Yeah.
Didn't exist.
To Russia, yeah.
Well, luckily you were on electronic publishing by then. And then this horrible stuff happened.
Well, that certainly stopped travel for her. Actually, but you ended up in Venice and met a bunch of Americans there, didn't you?
I did. I used to travel with a bunch of women travel writers, and we'd go away just for fun for a week. And this happened, 9/11 happened, and we were going to meet in Venice on the 16th of September. And we were going to meet on the Rialto Bridge, and we're coming in over 2 or 3 days. And I didn't know who was coming. We were trying to find out who was where in America. In the end, most of them turned up over 3 days, and there was all these big reunion scenes on the bridge. But we were coming back through St. Mark's Square, and we stopped to listen to music. Venice was dead. It was so quiet, and all the travel had stopped. And we sat down, and there was a band, like a little quartet playing, and they were playing. The waiter came over, and he said, heard my friend speaking, and he said, "Are you from America?" And they said yes, and they went and told the band, and they played New York, New York, and everyone burst into tears. It was one of those moments you just remember.
But Tony, you took that as a reason to
I've had a line on this, Badlands I wrote because George W. Bush said there's 3 countries axis of evil, Iran, Iraq, North Korea. And my first thought was, well, I want to go there. Now times have moved on. Donald Trump gave me 12 countries.
I love this slide. This is in the New York Times. On traveling to troubled states, they're never as evil as they're made out to be. So true.
Absolutely true.
But, Tony, I saw this quote. This is the 2 of you in Bali.
Oh, God.
Bali.
There was some German travel publishers who were recreating their...
So in 1972, Maureen says, Bali was my perfect dream of a tropical island. 2025, Tony in his blog says, I hope I never have to go back to Bali. I simply never want to sit through another hour of Balinese gridlock. Maybe, in the interest of time, maybe during Q&A, we could ask a question about over-tourism. Some might even say, Tony,
it does exist.
It's our fault.
You said it, but and you said that if we did a one-off guide to Afghanistan and nobody, we did.
People kept saying, you've ruined this country and you've ruined that country because you did a guidebook and everybody went there and became over-touristed. Well, we did do a guidebook to Afghanistan, and I would love to say that I've ruined Afghanistan. If people would say, well, the Taliban were bad and the American invasion was awful and those Russians, we don't want them back. But when Lonely Planet did a guidebook, then it all went downhill. That would be a wonderful claim.
Well, I will pause because the next phase is about your philanthropy, your other things you're doing. Well, you're doing cool things. Like you sent me this picture of these Komodo dragons behind you in Komodo. So you have been traveling. I'm forever grateful. As Sergei mentioned, I hold the Tony and Maureen, it's such an honor, chair in entrepreneurship. Very quickly, when we first met, 2008, late 2008, you were both of you were very keen to make sure, or at least hope, you were very gracious about it, that the holder of the chair, the school had already picked me, so at this point I had to, figure out what I was going to do. Would do entrepreneurship in emerging markets. What was the logic for why entrepreneurship in emerging markets?
Well, so much of Lonely Planet had been in the early days emerging markets, doing books to places other people weren't doing books. So, that was our world. And when we had a Lonely Planet Foundation, and basically it was trying to put money back into the sort of places we did books about. If we were doing guidebooks to Africa, then some of that Lonely Planet Foundation money should go into projects in Africa.
And of course, here we are at the Wheeler Institute, and you have many other, and maybe we can come back to this. You were giving. Your philanthropy began even much before the BBC sale and so on, and you were doing things in various countries even before.
1987, we started the foundation.
Because until a few years before, you were living in poverty yourself. That's impressive.
27 cents. We did start it at that time, and it grew. We did a percentage of our income or profits. It was
the gross profit before interest and tax.
Yeah, and we actually did have a little Lonely Planet Foundation office within the office, and a lot of the ideas we developed would be our writers would come back and said, I was in this country and I saw this wonderful project, and we would say, right,
we only worked with projects that were already there. Local people had started something. If there was somebody we met or somebody we heard of who was doing something really, really good in their village or small town, then we would get in behind them. But we never went in and just said, this is a good idea. We only worked with people who were already doing good things.
Well, I'll end with this. I love this quote by Pico Iyer, well-known travel writer, philosopher, travel writer. As spirited and engagingly human as the books that have taught us how and why and where to travel, Tony and Maureen Wheeler's story describes a miracle that, in its way, is as inspiring and wondrous as the temples of Pagan or Easter Island statues.
That's a bit much, really.
Well, thank you, Tony and Maureen. We'll take a few questions. If you could raise your hand, say who you are, and I see a hand there. Do we have some mics? Yeah. Thank you, Max.
Thank you. My name is Guang Ming, and I work in London, but I was based in Beijing, China. And my question is, when writing travel guides, how did you avoid cultural stereotypes and strive to present an authentic view? Because the travel guides are written in English by the English-speaking persons, and the travel guides written by the local people. Some of them, the views are quite different. Definitely the differences, but some are quite different. How can you avoid doing that? Thank you.
Well, I don't know that you can absolutely avoid some stereotyping, because when you're trying to explain things to people so they'll organize, but when they can understand, what maybe somebody's hand gestures might be different, or that people here seem to be much more excitable or friendly or whatever. You will say those sorts of things. But when our books started selling well in China, we actually started doing Chinese language books with Chinese writers. We did the same in India. We did separate books in India, Japan, Korea. So, when you start doing the books, they are written by Americans, English, Europeans, whatever. But when there is a market there, then of course you try to as much as possible.
I think China was probably the perfect example of it, because our Chinese partners ended up doing a whole series of regional guides to China, which were never available in English. They were only ever in Chinese. And a similar sort of thing happened. I remember the Italians saying, We just need more restaurants in these books.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It was the same in Europe. We did books in German and, and French and Italian, Spanish, because obviously, you can't always present a picture from outside if you're not part of that. So, yeah, there was quite a bit.
Yes, up there, Max, you'll have a proper workout. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Justina Chikastron. I'm from Uganda. First of all, I'd like to thank Wheeler Institute. I got to know about it during lockdown. And I can't recall where I got the link from. But during lockdown, as we all know, especially in Uganda, it was total lockdown. You couldn't move out. And so the webinars and seminars were really, really helpful for us. And I'm an economist, so it was really good. And they've continued to happen. Fortunately, this time I happened to be in London, and I thought, right, let me come here and attend.
Welcome.
Thank you. Number two, we've used quite a number of, this is my husband, Thomas. We've used quite a number of Lonely Planet books as we traveled. And I must say they were really, really accurate. I think the best one was the one on Ireland. It was to the point, like everywhere we went, And I think recently also Australia. So I must say, yes, sometimes I think it's inevitable. You cannot avoid, I haven't read the one on Uganda, but of course, if you are to write about the borders, which we hate, calling a European a Muzungu, it's inevitable. It has to be there, because if such things are not there, then the book is not authentic. Finally, the point you made on, your foundation and how you support work. It's good that you're supporting work that has already started. I've worked in the area of development assistance over 30 years, and that is how you ensure sustainability, because you're not coming down and imposing a project, but it is homegrown, and in that way it will be sustainable. So thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Question here.
Microphone's on its way. I finally got to Uganda I'd been to Kenya, I'd been to Tanzania, been all around there, but Uganda, for some reason, I hadn't been there. But just a couple of years ago, I went there. Had a fantastic time. Loved it.
Thank you. I'm Mandeep Rai, and it's interesting that you don't want flattery, so I'm not going to try and flatter you, but your Lonely Planet books have literally made my life. I've traveled to now over 175 countries, and it wouldn't have been possible if the Lonely Planet didn't exist. I remember when I first went on my first trip was actually to India, and my mother said, I know how dangerous that place is. Don't go there. And if it wasn't for the Lonely Planet, that wouldn't have happened. And a question I'm often asked is, what's my favorite country? So I'd like to ask you, what's your favorite country, please?
So, interesting. Tony, you have a blog on exactly this.
Yeah,
it's a question you hate.
What's the question?
And how many countries have you in total visited, please?
Oh, dear me, two bad questions. Because Maureen is saying that I take too many notes, so I do know how many countries I've been to, and it's about the same as you. I haven't been everywhere at all. And I've got a number of friends who have put a tick beside every single country box. I like wherever I was last week very often is my favourite. Lots of places I love going back to. Who doesn't like going back to Italy? The food is terrific. And countries I've had really good times in lots of them, and I'll go back again.
I would say probably my favourite country is Nepal, because I've been there a lot, and it's one of those places where you're walking and the people are lovely. I like the landscape. I think that will always. I'm going back to Kathmandu actually. Probably going to say my last goodbye in September. I don't know that it's not the same place, but Kathmandu is still the most magical place I've been.
Perhaps a last question here. Yes. Peter.
Hi, everyone. I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation and this speech. To be honest, I went to a lot of like event or conference. I hear people talk, but I think this one is most fun one I have been recently, because I think it was so interesting. You share your pictures when you're younger time, you travel all different countries, and you're not just as a business person to publish the journals, but as a real traveler actually to show to everyone what you experience and what you found. I found Lonely Planet is not only a tourist book, guided book, it's actually the places we all human to share the common experience. And you want to share with other human, how do you feel during this trip? And I found this really interesting. That's the reason why your book is very different from other tour guide book. So, and I was very inspired by you guys as well. So I was always working in investment bank, like in American banking in London. And I found my life is always very like boring or rude, like in the office. But I really like the Lonely Planet. Well, since I was childhood, I was reading it all the time. I always have a dream to traveling. But I guess because when I was graduated, I was always working in the banking, so I didn't have much time for my personal trip. And then actually interesting, the opportunity came actually last year. I joined one of the Japanese companies. So I joined as actually CFO with a hotel group. So by your inspiration, because it was very interesting journey. And in our hotel, I could met, we have 5 hotels in Japan right now, and I could met so many travelers and come here. And I always ask them, how do you guys actually traveling alone or solo traveler? And they always say, sometimes they say they always read Lonely Planet, this kind of journalists. So my question today, I would like to ask you guys. So when you are a traveler, when you're choosing hotel, what kind of hotel you would choose? What kind of style you would recommend to your readers?
Tony likes modern hotels. Wherever there's a new hotel, he likes new hotels. I like older traditional hotels. I just have to say it's been a very long time since we spent £2 on a room.
I don't know. I mean, there are still places you go to, and you know the best hotel in town is the Mission Guest House or something, and it's $5 or whatever. You know, and if you're going to go there, that's the best there is. But I've seen all the bed bugs I ever need to. There's a choice of bed bugs or 5-star. I'll tell you where I am.
From hotels to airlines, as fans go, you're a fan of Ryanair, for instance. You quite like Ryanair. You've written about it.
Yeah, I mean, Ryanair works. They tell you what you're going to get. Not much.
No, nothing.
Not much. But it's going to be cheap, and we're going to get you there.
Well, somewhere near there.
Or somewhere near there. Not quite there.
You flew
I'm
all the
up
way.
there and thinking Stockholm.
I think we're out of time. Is that right? Yeah. We can clearly go on for a while. So I just want to say, Tony, Maureen, thank you. Thank you for having such a profound impact. Normally we have questions, sometimes very tough questions to our audience. Here it just seems like a love fest. And it says so much about you and the impact you've created. And as a member of the London Business School community, please know what a difference you've made each, not only through the many ways in which you have supported us, but also through the paths you've forged. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony and Maureen, and especially Rajesh for leading this wonderful conversation. Sorry we ran out of time. I know that Rajesh actually had 50 more slides. And I fully agree with Rajesh. It's just a happy evening we spent together. And thank you very much for this. A lot of people smiled. You smiled and laughed a lot, and that actually shows indeed how important it is to have something to be proud of, to have memories you want to come back to in those difficult times. Having an hour, 15 minutes together, smiling and laughing is such a precious opportunity. And I would just like to quote Tony on when you do business, make sure it's your first love. I think it's an important takeaway for many of you around the room, this piece of wisdom, and you see it did work for Tony, so maybe it's going to work for you. Now, Wheeler Institute never stops, and they use the dean as the announcer of the next event. That's literally true. I always do that, right? And so next week we'll have Daron Acemoglu, Nobel Prize winner and professor from MIT, talking about nothing less but remaking liberalism. So it's 19th of June. Please come, please register. As I said, Wheeler Institute is producing excellent, important, insightful events every week. Thank you.